going to gear up real quick, head into the bank, so I can go and meet up with the Scold. We're going to meet up in Catherby, do some fishing together, just kind of hang out and talk. But I'm very excited to get to chat with him and find out more about how he got into doing animation and how he got into doing animation specifically with old school RuneScape and what that process has been like for him. The Scold works with a ton of other content creators within the OSRS community, making thumbnails and animations for their videos. He also has a lot of tutorials on his channel, as well as showcasing some of the stuff he's worked on. I'm really looking forward to connecting and finding out more about his process. So we'll go ahead and we'll meet up with him, and I think it's going to be great. I'm also in a hotel room recording this on my laptop, so things might look a little different, and I've noticed it's a little stuttery doing stuff, so I apologize for that. I'm going to catch some sharks. I don't know, is that what you're fishing as well?
Yeah, I'm going to catch some sharks. It's like my go-to. I haven't got the highest fishing level, so it's my go-to, like, trash food.
Yeah. It's good. It works out for so many bosses, especially Slayer. I was curious, how long have you been playing old school?
I started playing old school RuneScape when I was like, I think it was 10 years old.
Okay.
I remember it very vividly because I was at school and my like friends were talking about how they got a scimitar in some game, and I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like, oh man, I have to get the iron scimitar. It's going to make my life so much better. It's so strong. And I'm like, I want to check out what this game is. And I remember I got home from school that day. I worked out how to set up a RuneScape account. I completed the tutorial. I went to Lumbridge, and then I died to a rat.
Yeah. Okay.
Immediately, like I left Lumbridge. I'm like, oh, I killed a rat in Tutorial Island. I can kill this rat. And then I died to it. I closed the game. I said, I'm never playing that again. That was horrible. Because I lost all my stuff. And then about like 2 weeks passed. I'm like, oh, I should give that RuneScape a go again. And yeah, I've kind of played ever since. I had a brief period where I didn't play. I think it was like between 2012 and 2016.
Okay.
But yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of the same time I stopped playing. It was like right around EOC, but before it really turned into RuneScape 3. I took a long extended break as well.
I definitely stopped during EOC. Like I started playing a lot less, but it was what really kind of turned me off is when they changed all the armors and how they looked. I didn't like the new visual style. It didn't really gel with me that much.
For me, the biggest thing was the trading. When they changed the trading rules, I was like, what is this game doesn't even feel like the same thing anymore.
It was weird because I think it's visual style very much for me. Like yeah. I like to be able to like clearly see what's going on. So like when I look at RuneScape 3, like RuneScape 3 has a lot of good things going for it. It's got a lot of stuff in the game that's really cool and unique. But I look at the armor and the weapons and all that, and I'm just like, I don't get what's going on. There's so much stuff. Like the basic staff of fire spurts flames out of everywhere. It's like, is this a basic staff or is this a super duper staff? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. It does communicate a lot more. Like you kind of need boring stuff to make the special stuff feel special.
Yeah. Like, the coolest thing with any MMO, I think, is looking at like another player and going, whoa, that guy's gear has spikes and death flames coming off it, and he looks so cool. How do I look so cool? I'm just wearing like a standard knight's helmet. And then you go on your quest to do it. It's like there's a lot of MMOs and they put like transmogrify options into it so you can like swap your gear in and out visually.
Yeah.
I think it kind of kills a lot of that like visual progression where you look at someone else and go, oh man, if only I looked like them.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Have you always been really into the visual side of games? Has that been something that's most important to you when you think about playing something?
Oh, for sure. I've always loved visuals and games and how graphics work. Like modding has always been my major thing. That's kind of like how I got into a lot of 3D stuff is I've always loved modding games and being like able to tweak, add my own armors in or even tweak the graphics, put in fresh textures over everything. So for me, visuals is like super important.
Yeah. So when did you start getting into animation?
I started animating when I was like, 12? I was really young when I started animating, but I started doing like a lot of hand-drawn animation.
Okay.
And so that's when you draw like every individual frame. And when I was about like 15, I just stopped one day. I woke up one morning and I was like, there's too much time and effort that goes into doing hand-drawn animation. So I like just stopped for like several years.
Yeah. Were you doing,
and then
if I could guess, especially because I think we grew up around the same time in the same internet era, was it stick figure fighting type of animation?
Oh, it was so stick figure fighting. That was my thing.
Those were
I did
awesome.
so many stick. It was a lot of stick figure fighting, or like I guess you could say Dragon Ball Z-esque animations trying to do that.
Yeah, I would watch them all the time. I loved them. They were so fun because there was no real stakes. So you could be as brutal and violent and not feel bad about it at all. I don't know if that makes sense, but it was just like a lot of fun, but no, you don't feel guilty. If I don't know if that makes any sense.
Oh, it's fascinating, the world of stick figure animation, because it's so simple to draw like character designs. Like it's just a stick figure. You don't have to worry too much. So you can focus pretty much entirely on like the movement and making that as clean as possible.
Yeah. What were you editing that with back then? Were you doing like stills and paint, or are you doing something more advanced than that?
Oh, all right. So I used not Adobe Flash Animator. Okay. This was before that time, and I also couldn't afford it. I used Macromedia Flash Animator. It is the most awful program in the world if you ever look back at it. So that was before Macromedia. I think they got bought out by Adobe because you could have either Adobe Flash or Macromedia Flash.
Okay. The name is ringing a bell, but I don't think I ever actually used it myself.
Yeah, when you hear the name Macromedia, it's like one of those like weird things where you're like, I swear that exists, but I can't put my finger on what it was because it just kind of got obliterated by Adobe.
Yeah. So you said you did it up until you were 15 and stopped?
I did, yeah. I just kind of like woke up one morning like, oh man, I'm like, there's so much time that goes into like doing hand-drawn animation, and I just stopped and I put it down and I didn't touch animation for years. And then I think it was about 4 years ago.
Okay.
I watched Berserk 2016. It's a anime that is known for being all in 3D and having terrible animation. And I watched it and I'm like, dude, surely I can make animation that bad in 3D and I can save so much time. So from there, I was like, let's learn 3D animation. And then from there, I was like, well, where can I start? I'm like, well, I don't want to make my own models because that's just going to be like a roadblock for me learning. And then at that same like time period, the Swampletics finale released, and I was like, hey, they use RuneScape models for that. Maybe I could like chuck a RuneScape model in and learn how to do 3D animation with that. And then from there, I just continued.
Yeah. Was it Little Smokey? Was that the guy's name who did Swampletics thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was so good. It was I think that was one of the first like Blender edits that felt like something special that I had seen.
It was one of the first like Blender edits. Smokey is a very talented person. They did a lot of really weird stuff back then because they didn't have all the tools we have now. So like he rebuilt the Theater of Blood. He didn't just like export it.
Like he painted the whole thing?
He made it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. He
3D modeled it, yeah, which is just
insane.
Yeah, like there's a large amount of time that goes into like making something like that, which is pretty impressive. And you know, we still build a lot of things today. Like when I was doing the Wild Gothic Sleeps trailer, I had to build the entire landscape for that, and you know, it's fine. But we have a lot of tools now that can like save time when it comes to building things.
Yeah. All the exporting stuff seems really powerful for that.
Yeah.
Being able to just right click on stuff in game.
Yeah, it saves so much time. Like when I first started, the answer was if you wanted an environment, you had to build it from scratch. So like you'd often try and replicate parts of environments or aspects of environments and like put it together from there. So you wouldn't get like, if we were doing a scene fishing at Catherby, I'd make a beach, I'd grab these trees, I'd grab some water, and I'd grab some of these rocks, and then we kind of make it look like Catherby.
Yeah.
As close as it can. But now we just export Catherby.
Yeah. That's got to be a huge time save. Do you have, like, for your workflow, if you're going to do, say you're going to make a scene here in Catherby, do you have the world pre-rendered, or are you going to export it fresh, bring in just what you need, and start from there?
It depends a bit. So previously I'd export it every single time and work with what I need. So when rendering, it takes a really long time if you want to use some nice high quality settings. And to save the amount of time, you want as little stuff on the screen as possible.
Yeah.
So previously I just export what I need. But at the moment, I've kind of changed my workflow up a bit. I'm working in Unreal Engine 5. I've transitioned a lot to using that.
Okay.
And the main thing I've done with that is it's got a pretty much real-time renderer. So I can export as much of the map I want and reuse it. And just the biggest time chunk is making sure that I've cleaned up the map as much as possible and tried to future-proof it.
Yeah. So you're basically, it's kind of, I don't know if you watched it, but Red versus Blue, the machinima, you're like in a video game with Real Engine 5?
No. So Unreal Engine 5 actually has a lot of capabilities, and it's a really cool tool. So the best way to explain it is they've launched it as a game engine. And when they launched Unreal Engine 5, they said this is going to be a game engine. It's going to be really cool. And then a couple of film studios turned around to Unreal Engine and said, hey, this looks as good as our path tracing renderers. And path tracing takes a really long time to render. And they said, do you reckon like you could add some features in so we could use this in real time? And Epic turned around and said, yeah, we can chuck some stuff in. Sure. You can like, do some visual effects in this. And then, the couple of shows used Unreal 5, and then The Mandalorian turned around and said, we're building a giant LED panel we're calling the volume, and we want to be able to like have our characters walk around in the volume in real time. Do you think we could use Unreal for that? And Epic turned around and said, sure, and now it's used a lot for film and cinema.
Okay, yeah. I think I saw, it's like 5 screens for The Mandalorian, right? Where it's like, the camera, there's a digital camera connected to the physical camera, moving the background and stuff around,
correct.
Right?
Yeah, it's a giant series of LED panels, and what that means is they don't have to green screen. So if Mando has shiny armor, like the background's going to reflect onto his armor instead of just green.
Yeah. It's so impressive.
Which is, yeah. And when I started seeing that, that's when I was like, I think I might shift to Unreal 5 because like I may lose some graphical fidelity. So the advantage of Blender is it will do very good glass. If you need glass to look like real glass where it has those refractions and all kinds of unique splits up of light, sure, Blender is great for that. But at the end of the day, like I'm fine if I lose a little bit of my quality with glass. Like I'm animating with RuneScape characters. We don't need that like level of graphical fidelity. So dropping a couple of like features and gaining the render time has been a huge thing for me.
Yeah. Is the what do you call it? The modeling when you're posing everything, has that sped up or is it about the same?
It actually takes a bit longer.
Okay.
The program's designed by aliens. It's not designed for humans. I had a couple of people like, oh, shit. I was talking to them. They're like, oh, I work in Blender. Should I learn Unreal? I'm like, yeah, sure. But like, it sucks. The program sucks. It's awful. I couldn't make it to the tutorials are awful. Like there's so many parts about where I'm like, there's going to be a lot of roadblocks. You're not going to have a nice time learning it because I tried it a few times and it's a weird program.
Yeah. Okay. What do you find weird about it between the two? Like what features would you want to bring from Blender over if you could?
So modeling would be the major thing. You can't model in Unreal.
Okay.
So the workflow is still pretty similar. Like I make everything in Blender and then I transfer it over to Unreal. But like if I make everything in Blender and then I make one tiny mistake, I have to go back to Blender and then port it back into Unreal. I can't like fix it in Unreal.
Yeah.
I'd also love for it to be able to import materials. You can't import materials. It doesn't have geometry nodes. It uses particle systems completely differently. I do like their particle systems, the way it works in Unreal, but like Blender also has some really nice features. It's just a weird thing.
Sure.
It also has no support for shape keys, which is quite bizarre. So shape keys is how RuneScape animations work, and it's really, really cool. Shape keys are wicked. Pretty much the way RuneScape animations work is the same way they do mouth movements in every other game.
Okay.
So what it is two models, one with the mouth open and one with the mouth closed. And it's called a shape key.
Yeah.
And then the computer blends between those two models.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So in the case of RuneScape characters, when they do their movements, it's moving through shape keys as actually a series of models that are posed and like there's different things in your models, like shifting is the best way to explain it. Like it's the same model, but it's like moving those vertices all around.
Yeah.
It's not driven by a rig. So normally a model's driven by bones and those bones move and they tell certain parts of the model to like track with them. Unreal has zero support for those. So every animation I do on Unreal, I have to craft by hand. I can't export in-game animations.
Oh, that sucks. Especially,
yeah, well, I think it's great though. Like it looks better. You can make your own thing and make something special.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I was thinking with
in-game animations, they look good in game, but they don't look the best in a cinematic place.
Yeah, no, I gotcha. So you started out. Were you just making your own stuff with Old School at the time? Were you thinking about YouTube? How did all that kind of begin for you?
So the way I started out is I wasn't really thinking about YouTube. I was just kind of, I was just making my own stuff and I made some silly videos. And I also saw that like there was no real good tutorials on how to make it. So I made like a couple of like quick little tutorials on how to get Blender stuff into, RuneScape into Blender and how that works. And then from there, I got my first inquiry for an animation. And I was like, oh, cool. People like give you money for this? That's the people want this? That's awesome. Like, I had no idea people wanted this. I just was like making it in my bedroom. And like, hey, could you make a thumbnail as well with that? I'm like, yeah, sure, I could do that. I was like, I had no idea that thumbnail designs was a thing that like people even thought about. I just was like, I made a couple of videos here and there and I just slapped a thumbnail together. And I was like, yeah, call it a day. And then from there, I had one job and then another job, and it just kind of spread through word of mouth. I've never like jumped around and like advertised or went up to people and be like, hey, I need to work with you. Like it's just always been like word of mouth. And yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. What do you have a preference between like the longer animations or the thumbnails? Which gets you more excited?
I like a balance.
Yeah.
Like I find a balance is really important. Like because this is my job making thumbnails and animations, if I spend a whole day just making thumbnails, the day ends up getting really like it just gets lost. You know, I make like 5-8 thumbnails in a day. And by the end of the day, I don't know which one goes to which person. I've just like put them all together and it becomes a bit messy.
Yeah.
So I like the long projects because it kind of breaks up my day. So I can spend like the start of my day or the end of my day animating, working, putting something together. And then I have some opportunities for a break in there where I can make some thumbnails, some very quick jobs. Because if you're always working towards like a long job that takes like a couple of days, a couple of weeks, then like it just feels like you're never making progress and you're treading water. But with the balancing out of being able to do thumbnails and animations, it's kind of like I can quickly get that bit of dopamine. Oh yeah, I completed a task. I completed a job. Now back to the long thing.
How in a week, how many projects do you think you could do on average?
I probably do about 20 thumbnails a week, and I probably do about 2 animations.
Okay. And then when you're talking animations, those are like 10, 15 seconds or closer to like a minute long?
Probably about 15 seconds to a minute.
Yeah. That's a ton of stuff in a week.
Pretty broad range.
Yeah. No, you're good.
Yeah, I get busy.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like a lot. What's the longest project that you've worked on?
The longest project I probably worked on was I was working with a YouTuber by the name of Tierzu. So it wasn't necessarily a RuneScape project, but he was putting together a Nebula original. So Nebula is like a streaming service.
Yeah.
Called, I just have to make sure I get the name right. Duelist Mansion. Yeah, I was thinking of a couple of different names while that. So the show was called Duelist Mansion. It was a Yu-Gi-Oh show where contestants would compete in challenges and get cards. And then at the end of the episodes, they would play Yu-Gi-Oh! And Tizu approached me and he's like, I want to be able to like have Yu-Gi-Oh! Like the TV show. When they summon the monster, boom, the monster comes up. So we did like 6 episodes, and I think each episode was like around 20,000 frames of animation that we had going, and that was a massive job.
Yeah.
It was huge.
So you were mixing the Blender stuff with live footage with the kids?
Yeah, so that was like a full VFX job. So I was presented with the live footage where it had like the series of shots all cut together, and then my job was to put the VFX in. Going
into that, did you feel like that was in your wheelhouse, or did you feel like you had to learn a lot to be able to do that?
I definitely learned a lot while doing it. The first thing I did when I approached it, and if I ever get a weird job where I'm like, oh, this seems like really tough or really odd, I often do like a test first. And in my scenario, what I did before I started, I said, look, I just need to make sure I can do this. So I sat down, just recorded a basic video going, I summoned the Blue Eyes White Dragon, and I slapped the card down on the table, and then boom, the Blue Eyes White Dragon shows up. And once I did that, I was like, okay, I can do this. Whatever challenges come up here, I can tackle.
And then, so that was, you say 6 videos? Sorry, I think I'm...
6 episodes worth. And I think, there was, I'll grab these, I think there was 10 jewels in each video, and each one was about 20,000 frames.
That's so much, man. How long did that take you?
Actually, there was 11 jewels. It took me, we worked on it for a good couple of months. I think it was like 4 months we spent working on it. It was massive. It was a huge job.
Yeah. And were you still doing all the RuneScape stuff alongside that, or was that kind of the only thing you were doing at that time?
I was doing the RuneScape stuff alongside it, but I definitely reduced the amount of animations I put out.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
So I still got my same amount of thumbnails done, but I was doing less animations.
Yeah.
It was really cool because it meant I had to work with a whole heap of different stuff and different models. So it gave me like a nice little break so that I could kind of expand out and try new things, new ways of animating and new techniques.
So when you're working on a project that is that big, do you find you have a lot more freedom in that? Or do you feel like you are having to focus more on, is this what you want? And like keep checking in?
So with a project of that size, we started off a lot with like, is this what you want? Are you happy with this? And then at some stage, and this is the same with working with any person I work with, like the first thumbnail I work with someone will be very much, is this what you want? Are you happy with this? But then after a while, you just develop a rhythm where you know what the person wants. You can read their mind. When they say, hey, we need this, you can just go, boom, I've got it for you. I know what you want. And that's probably the most important thing when growing into doing like any client work is learning to quickly read someone's mind. To be able to like over time know what they want before they want it. Yeah, no, there was someone else that was doing a similar line of work to me, and they were saying like, oh man, some people just, they don't know what they want. And I said, like, one of the things that you got to like build up is that skill of reading someone's mind. Like you got to be able to like, if they say, I don't know what I want, sometimes you got to be able to say, I know what you want.
So if me and you were going to work on a project and this is the first time we're doing it, how much would you want me to bring to the table to make it easier for you? Or does that make it more difficult if I have a lot of ideas?
So the most important things to bring to the table is like, what is the job for? How do you want this to exist and what do you want it to be? So in a case of an animation, like say if you want an animation, we need to like discuss like, how do you want this animation to flow? How does it fit into your video? How does it work? So best example is, say you're about to kill a boss in your awesome series and you're like, I'd like to have the boss have like a little intro where he looks fierce because I'm going to say this boss is like, my tile locked mega ultra 1 HP account is facing this boss and it's going to be epic and it's going to be the hardest challenge yet. And I want to hype him up. So we can do that to hype it up, you know, so that helps me get direction of how to have the audience kind of feel. Then from there, like we'll start to talk a bit about like, is there any specific shots you want? What specifically do you want to show, not want to show? Is there any things that you like? Like if you like sent me like, oh, I want my character dodging some arrows like it's from the Matrix, like share with me your vision of what you want. And then we can bring that to life for an animation.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really cool.
For a thumbnail, a RuneScape thumbnail, the most important thing to bring to the table is what's your video about? And it sounds like completely shocking to think like, what's your video about? Shouldn't that be like the first thing? It's like sometimes that's like the hardest thing for some creators to come to. What is your video about? Like, what's the hook? What does get someone to want to watch this? What's the storyline here? And if you've got a clear storyline, the thumbnail's easy to do, and then the video will perform really well because the audience can like, as you're scrolling through YouTube, you'll see it and go, okay, so this guy is killing bandos and he's got loot from 10,000 kills and made a ton of money. Or like this guy he's got a 1 HP locked account and he's going to be doing Jad. Cool, I get what's going on.
Yeah.
Like, when you start like knowing exactly what your video is about, then you can start very quickly working out how best to represent it.
What do you see that people seem to get wrong most often when it comes to making their own thumbnails?
Ooh. I think the thing people get wrong most often is they put too much in it. And because of that, it muddies the water with what the video is about. And not only that, they want to put themselves in it a bit too much. So say if we do like a loot from, it's a really simple video. Araxor just came out. So say it's a loot from 10,000 Araxor.
Yeah.
A really bad thumbnail, will have the person's character, and then it will have 7,000 items around the character. Then we'll have the boss in the background, and then it will have 7,000 items around the boss. Maybe it's got the boss's minions accompanying them. They put together the gear that they got on their character, but they also want like some kind of iconic look. And you look at it and you go, there is so much going on here. Where they could have just had a picture of the boss that said loot from 10,000 kills. And the audience would look at that and go, hey, I know what that video is about. Even then, they could simplify it down to even just 10,000 kills, picture of the boss, title, loot from 10,000 kills.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. To have too much information can be so distracting from what you're looking at that you just like, I don't even want to look at this anymore. But at the same time, going too simple can feel cheap. Do you have any tips or ideas to go from, a PowerPoint presentation from the 90s looking thumbnail, but still keeping it simple to where it looks important or well done?
I guess probably the most important thing is, if you want your thumbnails to not look simple, is to have like gradients. Like make sure you have that jump in quality, and that quality kind of stares out. And what I mean by gradients is like, the colors should go from one to another across the thumbnails the viewer reads the image. So in some scenarios, when I've been working with Behemoth, we've had a very simple thumbnail. Say, for example, there's one that we had, and it's a picture of a skill cape on an orange background. That's it. And in this scenario, the skill cape is not a render or anything. We just grabbed it. I grabbed it straight off the wiki. But we did a lot of things to make that seem of a higher quality. And the thumbnail actually looks really cool, the final one. So we had the outer edges be a bit darker than the center where the skill cape is. So the skill cape has that bit of gradient going out. It's that core focus. Your eyes lock into the skill cape. We did a couple of edge highlights on the skill cape to make it look that bit sharper while also, again, separating a bit further from the background. I think I put a really subtle shadow coming off the bottom. I added additional shadows to the skill cape to make the different parts stand out more. I added a bit of extra definition in Photoshop to the, I think it was like a agility icon, just to, again, make it stand out a bit more for the viewer. As long as you have it looking clear and some time and effort has gone into it, then it will look better than just the straight up wiki picture on an flat orange background.
Yeah. So
it's kind of a hard one. You can't just have a one size fits all to solve it.
Yeah, because then it becomes a parody of itself, or a parody of the thing you're trying to avoid, right? You figure out a style and you're like, oh, this is new, this is fresh, this doesn't look like anything else anyone else is doing. And then you do it for 100 more, and now it's, oh, this is just the same thing again.
Well, one thing as well that is kind of interesting with thumbnails, like you say, oh, this is new, this is fresh, this isn't something anyone else is doing. Sometimes that can be a mindset people get into, but that ends up hurting them. Because people look at it and go, I have no frame of reference for what this video is about.
Yeah, it's a great point.
And people like familiarity, right? There was a stage with video essays, gaming video essays. I remember on YouTube, and this is a great thing, where there was 3 channels and they used the exact same thumbnail design, where they got a character on the right, they had red text with black text as well, and it was something so-and-so game, Overwatch didn't just die, it was murdered, or something like that.
Sure.
And they all went around, they used the exact same thumbnail design, but what it did is they meant all those channels grew together, because if you liked one person's content, you'll probably like this content too, because the audience had that familiarity. So you can use a lot of familiarity and similar designs to your advantage.
That's a great point. Yeah. Do you think they're doing that on purpose, or it just kind of happened that way?
Oh, it was absolutely on purpose.
Yeah.
They definitely looked and went, man, that's working. Let's do that. And you see that similar thing with how people approach content. If you look at one chunk bands right now, one chunk bands are wildly popular. And you want people to know, if you're doing a one chunk man, that it's a one chunk man. So don't obscure it. Use the same techniques that people use. And there's generally people use impact font, and they write extreme one chunk in impact font with a black backdrop and a black outline, and boom, you instantly know it's a one chunk man account. Maybe they show the chunk.
Yeah. Having that language already established with the audience is a great point.
Yeah. And it's a similar thing. When Settle started his tile man, if you had those same looking tiles, people knew what they were in for, and that probably would have helped your channel grow significantly more than if you didn't use those same looking tiles, or you just had a picture of regular ground tiles, it just helps establish that audience expectation, which you should always be doing with a thumbnail. And often if I'm talking with clients and they're like, I don't know what my RuneScape thumbnail would look like or what it should look like, I say, well, what do you like? What's similar to your content? Let's look at similar videos and then use that to kind of set up our audience expectations.
Do you find that you get a lot of inspiration from other channels, or do you get it from other media for your own stuff that you're working on, if you're not directing a client as much?
With YouTube, it's good to look at YouTube, right? YouTubers master YouTube thumbnails, movie posters master YouTube movie posters. One thing that's really important to remember is the better thumbnail isn't the better art. Sometimes if it's a great art piece, it's not a good thumbnail because, it's not designed for clarity. When you're making a thumbnail, clarity is pretty much the most important thing you got to focus on. You always have to make it be as clear as possible.
Yeah.
Even if it sacrifices some of the artistic style.
Gotcha.
So quite often a good place to start is looking at similar videos, but also don't be afraid to look outside the RuneScape niche. RuneScape hasn't solved every problem with thumbnails. There's still like a lot of things. So like say, for example, if we got like a video where someone is doing a collection log, they're collecting lots of things. Well, if we're looking at collecting videos, the Pokemon people that make Pokemon card unboxing videos and Pokemon collection videos, they've probably mastered that far better than RuneScape players have. So let's make a thumbnail that maybe is a bit more inspired by Pokemon. If we're doing like a Gillenor game style challenge, maybe like Mr. Beast does game shows. Maybe he is a bit more wise on how to do game show thumbnails than maybe somebody else.
There's so much variety that old school offers. Like the amount of different content that you can pull out of this game always just kind of blows me away.
I think RuneScape has some of the most talented YouTubers out there. And I think one of the cool things that's contributed to it is the age demographic. Because, you know, we've all it's got a very tight age demographic where I think it's like males 20 to 35 is generally your range. 20 is is usually quite on the younger side.
Yeah. But
mainly that 25 to 35 range. And when you look at that age demographic, you've got guys that have a career that have probably mastered at least one skill, and they'll bring that skill to the table, which is really cool. You know, you get some people like, who's the guy he's awesome. He does like PKing shorts, Messiah, I believe his name is. His like background, I'm pretty sure, is like VFX and editing. Like that's why his stuff looks spectacular, because he has this awesome skill set that he's brought to the table. And because of that age demographic, there's so many cool skills that get brought to the table.
Yeah. Before you started doing this stuff full time, doing thumbnails and animations, were you working in animation outside of this, or is that it just led into a career for you?
I was a high school teacher.
Okay.
And I taught filmmaking. That was my subject.
Yeah.
What my day would pretty much consist of in regards to like what I was teaching is I'd be spending my days talking about this is how you edit in Adobe Premiere Pro. This is how you do Photoshop. This is how you use cameras. This is how cameras take photos. This is how you storyboard things. This is how you do some general visual effects. This is how you do basic keyframe animations. But also there'd be the theory side of that where I'd be saying, this is how like media works. This is how like online media works. This is how social media works. And we'd be talking through stuff like that. That's pretty much what my days consist of. And then also on top of that, I was teaching history. So that was my other subject.
Sounded like busy days.
Yeah. Oh, it was an interesting job.
Yeah.
There's some aspects that I do miss, but this is much more fun.
Yeah. When you're doing the film stuff, did you enjoy the editing side of it or the capturing side of it more?
Oh, I've always loved cameras. Mm-hmm. Like I love photography and videography and all that. So I did enjoy I enjoyed the camera side of things. And I think that comes down to like, because it was teaching, I enjoyed like sitting down with like, you know, a bunch of students and being like, okay, guys, this is how they use a camera. And it's really cool. Teaching software was just like a really awkward scenario because it'd be like, all right, guys, here's a computer on the screen. Let's follow through with these actions step by step. And like, that's just like, it's a hard thing to kind of like work through.
Yeah. Hard to make exciting.
Yeah. Like you can do it. And I did like a lot of cool things. Like I remember one of the coolest lessons I did is we recreated a scene from Star Wars Rogue One with a $0 budget. And that was like, that was the best lesson ever. We just like grabbed whatever we could. Like, hey, what's Darth Vader look like? I don't know. I think he wears like a black suit. Cool. Well, we'll just get a black blanket. Do we have a lightsaber? No, we'll just pop it in post. It'll be great.
Yeah. It's like that Jack Black movie, Be Kind, Rewind. I don't know if you ever saw that.
I have not seen it. What's it about? What's it like?
So the premise is it's like, let's say 1995 time. They have a family-owned video rental place, and they accidentally, Jack Black's character comes in with a giant magnet, and he's like looking for something. I don't remember what he's doing, but he wipes all the cassettes, so there's no movies on there. So they go and they remake them one by one and rent out their versions of each movie, and it's like low budget, like very early YouTube style type stuff. It's pretty fun.
Oh, that sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it's a good time.
Remaking things is like such an important part for like learning content creation. Like I get a lot of people that like come in and they're like, oh, where do I start for learning? I'm like, if you want to start learning something, just try and like remake something. Like if you want to learn how to make thumbnails, look at thumbnails that like you think are really cool and go like, can I make that? And you'll learn so much in the process. Like whether it's thumbnails or animations, look at something and just go, can I make that? And if the answer is yes, then awesome. It'll take you like 5 seconds. But if the answer is no, then you'll overcome like so many obstacles and you'll learn so much about thumbnail design and different techniques people use and how they do it. Like try and remake. It's such a great learning tool.
Yeah, you have the settled video that you did where you recreate his from scratch. It's a really cool video where you kind of show each step and your thought process and how, like, I know me watching it, I was like, okay, I think that's about as far as I would get. And it's probably like 15% into your video. And then you just show like, okay, now I'm going to layer this and the shadows and the highlights. And you just keep going. It's like, oh, okay, I see the process of how to build this a lot more clear than I would have if I would have started on my own.
Yeah, well, like that one was really interesting. So that was something where I was like, I want to see if I can do this because the settle thumbnails are very good. Atat, that's the artist that makes those, he's really cool. He's really nice. He's really kind. He's also really, really good, right? Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things where I've always looked at his work and I'm always like, damn, I'm not quite hitting the mark. I'm not quite on par. And I'm like, screw it. I've tried this in the past and I have failed, but that was a very, very long time ago. Let's try it again. And let's really put the pressure on that I have to make this perfectly because I'm pretty sure I can do it now. And I did, and I worked through it. And it was interesting. The main thing that I tripped up on though when I was working on it is, I think I mentioned it in the video, is I was lining the character model up and I'm like, this isn't working. The proportions aren't right. And I even messaged Atat. I'm like, dude, did you use like 2 models and cut them together and like use different bits so the proportions are a bit more exaggerated? He's like, yeah, I think I did. I'm like, dude, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a smart idea.
But again, that was one of those things where I sat down like, I would like to learn how to see if I can learn something from this thumbnail. I like this thumbnail and hopefully through copying, I can grow and pick up a bunch of skills.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about, you'll see videos on like TikTok or YouTube or whatever, where they'll have side-by-side animations of like, I don't know, the Wizard of Oz, not the Wizard of Oz, Alice in Wonderland, and then something more current, and how they just like traced over the animation to give you that same emotional connection without even realizing it's the same thing.
Oh, the animation industry uses a lot of like other animations as references. The best example that I love for this, have you ever heard of the Akira slide?
Yes. Well, I've heard of Akira. Sorry, I'm not sure what you're going to say.
All right. So I think it's Akira. Maybe I might be wrong. It should be Akira, yeah.
On the motorcycle?
I haven't seen Akira. Yes, it is on the motorcycle. It is the Akira slide. So there's this shot in Akira where he is on a motorbike and he drifts. Mm. He slides the motorbike and his legs down. And if you've ever seen an animation that has a motorbike and the person slides to a stop, they do the Akira slide. And it's traced bit for bit, shot for shot. Everyone steals that piece of animation because it was so cool. It's even in, like, I was watching the trailer for Sonic the Hedgehog 3 that's coming out. They do an Akira slide. And it's just like, yeah, it's cool. Let's use that. Let's copy it. Can I copy it? Yeah, sure. Just make it look different. I don't want to make it look different. Okay, well, we'll just use it anyway. The animation industry does it all over the place. It's really weird.
Yeah, it's cool how it Like it's kind of like the language thing we were kind of touching on earlier, where there's this unspoken connection that you have to things like that you've seen before, and you don't even realize that's what's going on. You're like, oh, that's interesting, or that grabs my attention, but it's because you recognize it.
Yeah. Well, like Disney as a company is quite interesting because when they were in like their hand-drawn animation boom, they just reused parts. Like some of their dancing scenes are identical across movies because they just reused it. They said, well, we've done this perfect once before. Let's just reuse that asset.
Yeah.
And in their scenario, it was like they just draw over their drawings and use them as like a template.
So I saw in your video about making the video for Jagex, you at the end, you show kind of your inspiration shots compared to what you came up with. When you're doing that and the thought process behind that is, yes. Are you finding those shots first? Like, do you have the idea of what you want and you find the shot, or are you seeing that you're like, oh, that would be a cool image to use later and pulling it first?
So like I'm like a crazy person when it comes to movie scenes.
Okay.
Right? Like I have them like all burnt into my brain.
Yeah.
So like I'll be like sitting there and I'll be like, oh, yeah. I need that shot from Star Wars. It's going to be so cool. I got to use that shot from Star Wars. It's going to be awesome. And the whole scene's playing in my head. I'm like, yep, that's how it is. And I'll like have them all mapped out in my head. There is some scenarios where I'll be like grabbing different shots and I'll be like putting them together in a bit of a timeline so I can visualize it. But in my head, I've like usually got that all burnt in and I've got that worked out pretty much from the moment I've started visualizing the piece.
Mm. So do you think that's kind of how you think in like you think in other movies, if that makes any sense?
A bit. So it kind of depends on the scenario. If I'm doing something very story-based, then my process is very much like, what shots and what kind of like visual language here am I trying to use? Is there any references that I can use? Has someone done this style or this thing really well in the past? Mm. If I'm doing something that's a bit more of a montage, then my focus is usually on the transitions.
Okay.
So like there's a piece I'm working on at the moment, which is, I can say a bit about it. It's a guide and we want to show like different levels in the guide.
Yeah.
So my focus is purely on the transitions and keeping it as seamless as possible as if it's one shot. So there's a transition where it's a smithing guide and the camera goes into the furnace, it's all orange, and then comes out of a sword that's glowing orange because it's just been heated up in the furnace, so it should be orange. And then he hammers the sword, so it shows like that progression. And then I put a barrel of water in because, you got to dip your hot sword into the water. I know you don't do that in game, but it just felt like a little bit of a stretch. So a lot of steam comes up out of the water and that steam transitions us to the blast furnace, which is obviously going to be full of steam and smoke. So I'm like, okay, so I got a steam transition and then I got to go to Giant's Foundry for the end. I'm like, well, how would I get to Giant's Foundry? And I'm like, well, Giant's Foundry is a cave. So if I go behind an object, the whole camera will fill up with a black screen, and then I can come out of a black screen, which might be a bit of magma.
Yeah. And
the camera can point up and then it can show the guy hammering. So like in that scenario, I'm looking at transitions first and like, how can I connect the shots? And not so much like, has this been done really well before?
Yeah. Another thing that I noticed in your videos that you talk quite a bit about is the sound design for your videos. How important do you think that is to selling your animation?
People watch with their ears is the line that I always say. So like, if you have good sound design, you can actually get by with a lot of mistakes and showing so much less and doing so much less. So I think if we look at like the trailer I did for Jagex with the Summer Summit.
Yeah.
There is a stage where he slips over and the bottle goes over his head because he catches it and it's too heavy. So in that scenario, I have a slipping sound, I have the bottle flying through the air sound, but I'm pretty sure I barely animated him slipping over, but that whole thing's communicated because the next shot he's on the ground and your brain goes, okay, that's sound. If we look at the Wild Gothic Sleeps trailer I have, there's this shot where he's like running down the pathway to go and kill the tormented demons and take them out. and there's a whole heap of explosion sounds. If you watch that shot without sound, like it's just a bit of shaky camera and the guy's running and I think the light flares a little bit. Like the explosions were literally there, but it's not very clear. But the explosions pull the sound design, brings it all together that he's being bombarded with fireballs.
So when you're doing that, you're in the middle of animating that and you don't have the sound together. Are you just trusting that it's going to have the right vibe that you want? Or are you like willing to remake it if you need to?
So that's an interesting one. So there's a bit of like trust in the process. Quite often you want to get it as clear as possible, but sometimes you look at it and go, ooh, maybe this can use sound to pull the whole piece together. The Wild Gothic Sleep trailer was really interesting because they gave me a full storyboard. So there wasn't as much me like sitting down and going, okay, like what shots are going to work really well here. They gave me the storyboard shot for shot and said, can you follow the storyboard?
Yeah. How did your connection with Jagex, how did that all start?
It was 6:00 in the morning and I got a message. It was around the Winter Summit. That was the first job I did for them. And it was 6:00 in the morning and I got a message from Mod Goblin. And he's like, hi, I'm from Jagex and we'd love to work with you. And I said, whoa, that's really cool. But I've done the stronghold of security and it said, don't trust anyone pretending to be a moderator. I said, like, I don't want to be rude. This sounds really cool, but it feels almost too good to be true. Can you like give me some assurance that you're a moderator? I was like, just because I've done the stronghold of security a few times. And he's like, yeah, man, I'm a moderator. Like you can see my name at the bottom of posts and like, here's some like proof of it. Okay, cool. That sounds awesome. And they reached out to me.
Okay.
So then we did that job and that was really cool. And after that, we did Fresh Start Worlds. Okay. And that kind of came out. I did like a walking through video. I was doing like pretty much it was for the sake of practice where I was doing like walking through cities where I had a whole heap of people. Very chill videos. I'm like, hey, could you do that for like Fresh Start Worlds where like we're walking through Tutorial Island? So I did that video for them. And then after that, we did Forestry. And the Forestry one was probably when I did a big jump in quality. And after I did the Forestry trailer for them, they're like, okay, like we want to work with you a bit more closely. So we did the Summer Summit trailer and they really liked the look and style of the Summer Summit trailer. And then from there, we worked pretty closely and done a whole heap of stuff together.
Yeah. How do you find working for a company, especially one as big as Jagex, versus working with creators? Is there benefits, pros and cons to each?
It's a bit different because like, so when I send something to them, they're like, okay, cool. We'll like go through the review process and we'll get back to you. And I'd be like, oh, okay. But when you work with a creator, you get that immediate feedback. Like, oh man, this is sick. I love it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And then you got the scenario as well. Like they work for a company. So if I send them something on Friday, I don't work on the weekends. So it'll be like, okay, we got like 2 days and then we'll get back to each other. We'll get back to you like, you know, on Monday after we get together. And it's one of those things where it's like, you're not like a 24-hour, 24/7 available content creator. You're not at the computer 24/7. What do you mean? It's one of those really bizarre things where it's like, oh, what do you mean you don't work every single day, 24 hours a day? That sounds like odd.
Well, it does. I'm kind of surprised because the game is on 24/7. You would think the overlap, but I guess for creative and stuff like that, there's no reason for them to work over the weekends.
Well, they got to have days off, like, you know, workers' rights.
Yeah, no, for sure. I just mean like having extra staff that's covering the weekend. So it's like a full, but no, I gotcha.
Yeah. It's one of those like, it's a bizarre thing. I think it's like a bit of a weird thing about like content creation that like no one talks about. Where it's like, oh yeah, you'll have all this freedom if you're a content creator. It's like, yeah, they definitely do have a lot of freedom, content creators. Like that's an awesome part of the job. But the drawback of that freedom is that you are also on call 24/7.
Yeah.
You know, like you work for yourself, you work every day. You might have the freedom to like choose and your hours and be like, okay, I would really like to go out for lunch today or do this. But then at the same time, the sacrifice for that freedom is like, oh yeah, like the editor wants to message me on the weekend, or the thumbnail designer is messaging me at 2:00 at night. You know, that's one of those things where it's like, that's something that you have to manage.
Yeah. Do you work alongside with other people for your stuff? Like, do you have a team with you, or are you mostly solo and just working with different clients?
Like for my own videos?
So like, say Rindy is like, hey, I want you to make this video for me. Is it you and some other people that are going to work on that, or is it just going to be you by yourself?
So often how it works, especially as you work towards larger creators, is they'll have like a series of people and they work almost as the manager, right? So they'll put together their video in a rough state and then they'll reach out to their people individually and they'll be like, Skuld, we need a thumbnail and I'd like a short animation, 30 seconds. And then that'll go to them and they'll pass that on to their editor and the editor will like feed things back into them. So it's a really bizarre process where everyone's like swimming in their own circles on a project and no one sees like the full thing until it comes back and it's all being fed through the one person that is the manager. And it's a really cool part of the process to be with. So like Coxie as an example, like he releases his videos every 2 weeks and he works with a series of people and they swim in their seas and all that. Or if you look at like Chronicles, like with CampQ, he does an incredible job of managing that where he has quite a good number of people, I believe, that he works with to pull those videos together. Where in comparison, like Behemoth I work with, we're pretty tight and we all see how the pie comes together. Yeah.
So I'm not asking you to name names or anything like that, but have there been times where you've made an animation and the person you made it for either chopped it up or changed the music, did something that like kind of ruined it for you? Is that something that's happened? Is that something you have to deal with? Or is it just like, it's not mine, it's theirs, it doesn't matter?
Yes. The biggest thing that's happened is like I did some awesome sound design. So when I do an animation, I send them, usually we talk about like what song do you want in the animation, if you want like any background music. And I send them a version with the song and a version with just the sound design. So if they want to change it, reuse it, do whatever with it, they've got the sound design there. And I put a lot of time into sound design.
Yeah.
And then they just delete it.
Yeah.
And I've sat there and been like, yes, but you're happy with it. And at the end of the day, it's not my video.
Yeah.
It's their video. So like, on one hand, I'm kind of like, dang. But like, I'm not going to message them and be like, how dare you disgrace my art? Yeah. Like at the same time, I'm just like, yeah, man, like you're happy with it. Like that's the end of the day is the most important thing, as long as you are happy.
When you're doing sound design for videos, are you doing Foley stuff or are you just finding clips somewhere from a database?
So I have like done like some of my own Foley stuff, but you know, there are so many sound databases out there. Quite often, like someone's done it for you. So I usually grab them from like a variety of databases. Like there's some paid services you can get, which I've subscribed to, which can help you like access lots of sound databases. Like Motion Array has tons, Epidemic Sounds has a whole heap. But even YouTube, like if you go into YouTube Studio, there's the audio library and they have a database of like sound effects that you can just grab. And the only downside of the YouTube audio library is, say, for example, if you want like a really nice detailed sound effect, you'll have to do a lot of layering of sounds together.
Oh, okay.
Where some of the other audio databases, they'll layer it together for you.
Yeah. Have you snuck in the Wilhelm scream anywhere in any of your videos?
I haven't. I should. That's a really good one. I should sneak in the Wilhelm scream somewhere.
So when you're working with Jagex, to hop back onto that, how much time do they give you in advance for one of the bigger projects for them?
They give me a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Yeah, a couple of weeks, like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, around about.
Because watching your video the one you did for them for the Summer Summit, I think it was 3 days, 4 days.
That one was a quick one.
Yeah.
That one was a quick one, yeah. And in some cases it is like a very quick turnaround, but like when there's a couple of weeks, there's that bit of like time of like organizing what it's going to be about, how it's going to go. There's sending certain assets backwards and forwards. There's polishing up a couple of jobs because they are quite larger projects. But the Summer Summit was a very quick one.
Yeah. Do you find that you build the whole thing in your head to completion before you start? Or are you doing it as
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I can't start on anything until it all exists in my head.
Yeah.
It's one of those weird traits of me. Like I have to be able to visualize it in my head. And it's the same thing with like animating characters. Like if we look at the Wild Gothic Sleeps trailer, there's this shot where the tormented demon like stands up. Right? Mm-hmm. I believe that shot got cut down quite a fair bit in the final version. It was originally much longer. But I could not visualize how a demon stands up. And that was really hurting me and damaging how quick I could make it.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, I said, well, I need to get this done, and I've reached my own personal roadblock. This is an issue that like I have as a person, that I need to visualize something before I do it. So I just recorded myself standing up like a demon. Did a few different takes.
Yeah.
There's this wonderful video footage floating around in my hard drive of me going rah and standing up like a demon.
Well, how does a demon stand up?
Well, you got to watch the trailer. It was hunched over in a bit of like a powerful spin. It was kind of like my vision for it was, have you ever seen the film Terminator?
Yes.
All right. So you know how in Terminator, there's this lovely circle that appears and then the circle disappears and the Terminator's like crouched?
Yeah.
That was very similar to the storyboard we had where there was like this purple circle around the demon and the circle disappears and he's crouched. But the thing is with the Terminator, they stand up like robots. Mm. So that wouldn't really work for a movie reference. And I needed that. That was the reference in my head. So I'm like, I can't have them stand up like a robot. I want them to like explode with power as they stand up. So I had him kind of like lean in and swing a bit like almost like a discus thrower, but like a very bad discus thrower.
Yeah.
And then I wanted the dramatic look.
Are you working on any big projects currently? Do you have any bigger projects that you're working on?
I'm working on a couple of... At the moment, I'm working on some really, really big projects, and I wish I could talk more about them.
Yeah.
But sadly, I can't.
Yeah.
But all I can say is if you ever see me not posting very much, or I go very, very quiet, it means I'm working on something really, really big.
Yeah. Do you have an idea of when you would be able to talk about it?
This one will be a few months.
Okay.
In a few months, I imagine I'll be able to talk about it. Probably at the end of the year.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about was on your Discord, you have a bunch of people are posting things that they've edited, that they've come up with, thumbnails and stills and stuff like that. How has developing that type of community been?
That has been wonderful. I would not be here if it wasn't for the Discord. Like, I don't think I'd be doing what I'm the same amount of stuff that I'm doing. It's awesome because like one thing I really love about that space is like everyone helps everyone. It's kind of like we grow together, right? You know, people can share what they made, which is awesome. You get to see awesome things. People make really cool stuff, but people also like get to ask for help. And if one person has an issue, chances are someone else has encountered that issue at some point as well. So like that community is just wonderful. And I'm sure they're going to listen to this. And I just want to say like, I appreciate all you guys. You're awesome.
Do you have a favorite person? No, I'm just kidding. Who's your favorite person and least favorite person in the Discord?
I don't know. I can't answer that.
No, I'm just kidding.
But it's just awesome to see what people make, and that, you know, that's how a whole heap of tools came around. Like, I remember like the environment exporter and like stuff like that came around of someone saying, man, can we export environments? No. Hold up. I'll make that. Can we can we like there was a recent one where I was like, oh man, if we could flatten down all the materials to like a simple image texture where it's 1 pixel per texture, like that would be so cool. That would save so much time because like, and so much performance. Things would render so much faster. And this guy turns around, he's like, Ico. He's like, yeah, I can make that. I'm like, that's insane. That's so good. That's so helpful for everyone.
Is that kind of where like coding side of this stuff, are you not as familiar with that?
I'm not as familiar with coding. So my strengths is animation. That's my probably strongest part, my animation. And when it comes to coding, that's my probably biggest weakness. I am not very good. I can like read parts of code. I can interpret parts of code. But if you asked me to write a line of code, I'd stare at you pretty blankly.
Yeah.
Then I'm not too bad at modeling. I don't mind modeling. I've grown to enjoy the general intricacies of it. And I have done a fair few custom models throughout, and I don't think anyone's ever noticed that I made it and it's not professional. So that gets by. And I'm not too bad at materials, but animation is probably my biggest strength.
Yeah. Yeah, there's just so many elements into, like, obviously Pixar, massive. They have tons and tons of people, but everyone has specialties. And as a solo creator, that's a lot that you got to work or try to keep up with. How do you find getting help for areas that you struggle in?
When I struggle with an area, I have generally found like there's a lot of people that can help out. I'll generally ask around. The first place I go to is my Discord, and I say, hey, can anyone do this? Like there was a scenario where I had to have some wheels turning. Like this is just a really basic scenario. I had to have wheels turning, and I just needed them to turn on what's called a local axis. So it means as the car turns, the wheels can turn with the car locally. Instead of as the car turns, the wheels will start spinning around in all weird scenarios.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I just couldn't work it out. So I just asked, I said, hey, does anyone know how to make these wheels turn normally? They said, oh, you just press the local button. I'm like, oh, great. It's always just the press this button with 3D software, and finding the right button seems to be the biggest struggle.
Yeah, I think that with most programs, like even like Photoshop and stuff like that, it's learning what you can even do with the program. That is one of the biggest hurdles. Because you can have ideas and be like, I don't even know if that's possible. And you don't learn that until you start exploring it.
Well, that's one of the most fun things about Blender. And a lot of people don't know this about Blender. You can do everything in Blender. And it's definitely made by programmers because they sat down one day and said, should we add this feature? Yeah, we can add in this feature. Boom, let's go. Let's add it in. And they don't think twice about the features they add. Like Blender has some really weird capabilities. It has a full-on video editor built into the program. No one talks about that. No one mentions that. It has a full-in photo editor. The photo editor sucks, but no one talks about that. No one mentions that. It can do literally everything. You want to do a full-on Hollywood visual effects shot, make transformers in Blender? Yeah, you can do that. And it can look fantastic. But you got to find the right buttons. And sometimes people have different ways of approaching things. And one thing that I love whenever it pops up in my Discord, because this always pops up as a question, is the flames in Tombs of a Mascot. You know when you go to the loot chest and you get a purple and it has those flames in it?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things of our tools is those flames do not export properly. They look pretty horrendous when they export. They're straight, spiky lines. And people always ask the question, how do I make this look right? And what I absolutely love when people ask that question is we get about 7 different answers. I usually answer, oh, well, you could probably use an image texture. And I focus on like my strengths where like if we were to animate flames, we could probably use some shape key, some bit of like maybe an armature driver. You could use like an image texture that's projected onto a cube. And then we have like what's called noise. So different values pretty much driving a bit of shakiness and wobble in the image texture. Then some guy comes in and he's like, oh, you could use geometry nodes. Another person jumps in and says, oh, you can make it using like a completely different method. Like there's so many different approaches to the same problem. It's really cool.
Yeah. Where do you send people to? Like, so I know you have a lot of tutorials, but people are getting into Blender. Do you suggest those to start, or do you point them to a different direction?
Oh, if somebody is getting into Blender, it depends what they want to do. So the go-to tutorial for anyone that wants to learn Blender and start off as like a beginner guide is the donut tutorial. That's like the default thing that everyone mentions, and you make a donut and it goes over, you know, the basics of modeling, basics of sculpting, render settings. It's got everything in there. The only thing I have trouble with recommending that is I didn't do that. I've never made a donut. So like at the same time, I can't like say like, you gotta do this tutorial if I haven't done it myself. So I think if you're learning Blender is you gotta start off small, start off making something really simple, and then solve problems as they come up. The best way to learn like any software, no matter what it is to start off with having a very simple goal. So maybe you've got a simple goal where you want to make an animation where a guy walks. Right? That's your first thing to make. The first thing is a walk.
Yeah.
So then go through and solve problems and expect it to be a horrendous thing. So go, okay, so how do I get the guy into the program? Okay. You solve that problem. How do I rig him so he walks? Okay, solve that problem. I want to have a bit of lighting. How do I add lights? Okay, you've solved that problem. And suddenly you start learning step by step how to solve problems. And I find that far more effective than tutorials, because if you do a donut tutorial, you know how to make a donut step by step. But you haven't really made the connections that, oh, I need to model something. How do I do that? Oh, I need to rig something. How do I do that? Your brain's like locked in the donut, where if you've sat down and said, I need to add a light. I remember how to add a light. You remember like how to search for bits of information?
Yeah.
And not only that, you're learning, instead of just going to one space to learn something, you've learned how to solve problems for yourself. And one of the most valuable things you can ever learn is not necessarily like how to do something, but how to solve problems, how to work out how to solve problems when you do something. So, you know, you've learned how to read through the manual for Blender. You've learned maybe how to like solve particular things. You've learned how to find tutorials. You've learned maybe someone that makes real short, sharp tutorials that you really like, that you can easily like follow along and solve your problems.
Yeah, that's a great point. The learning on your own, or not on your own necessarily, but learning how to solve the problems, it like locks that in your head much faster than hearing someone say it's step 1, step 2, step 3. Because I know when I learn something, I do step 1, step 1A, step 1A2, you know, like I go all over the place and I refine that process each time to where it's like, oh, this is how I want to do it. This is how my brain wants to get me there.
Yeah. I remember when I was teaching specifically, like that was my major philosophy, that like, I remember I had a student and said, he come up to me and he said, sir, we're not doing anything. We're just making things. It was like for filmmaking. I said, huh? He goes, we're not learning something. We're just making things. And I say, yeah, but the things that you're making, you're going to remember that I made that thing. And next time you encounter a problem, say you need to make a lightsaber, right? You need to make a glowing light. You'll remember, oh yeah, I made a lightsaber once. That's an artificial glowing light. I'll just do that. And you learn the techniques and how to apply them because you've literally made something and you remember the time when you did something. as opposed to like if you get caught in a bit of like tutorial hell, you're just like going through steps, and that can be a bit like weird and awkward, I think.
Yeah, like Mr. Miyagi, teaching him to wax the car.
Yeah, like when you do when you're trying to learn something and you do it, it's much easier. It's why I like for like bringing back to RuneScape, when it comes to like boss tutorials, my favorite tutorials are King Condor's.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen his tutorials, but he does this like fantastic thing where he says, this is the gear you want. It doesn't really matter. Anyway, the boss is probably going to hit you with this. You'll learn it really fast because you're going to take a big hunk of damage.
Yeah.
Then you'll want to smack it with a weapon. Do damage. Don't let your health drop below 0. I'm like, okay. So I got to pray this. And now every time I do the boss, I just remember the gear doesn't really matter, but I should probably be prioritizing this. I got to pray this because it's going to hurt me. And if I do it wrong, I'll take a lot of damage. And he does it in like 2 minutes as opposed to like 15 minutes going through the meticulous inventory setup, the meticulous gear, which like at that stage, I'm watching the tutorial every time to like track with the gear and track with the inventory setup. It's like information overload as opposed to like when I get into the boss, I take a heap of damage. I go, I'm an idiot. I didn't pray range. I've now learned.
Yeah. Yeah. King Condor, his stuff is so much fun. He's got such a interesting style to his stuff.
He just explains it. I've streamed a few times and I've been like, I had to do a refresher on the boss. I'm like, don't worry, guys. I know the exact refresher. We are going to take like 5 seconds. We're not going to read through the wiki or anything like that. And he goes, hi, guys, we're going to beat King Black Dragon. This is what you need. Doesn't really matter. I'm like, okay, thank God. I can pause the video right there for 5 seconds. This is what I need. Doesn't really matter. See ya.
So when you are thinking about your career with old school RuneScape and animation, is there a direction you want to head to? Would like doing a studio for this be something on the horizon, or just I
thought it would be really cool to do a studio, but I think that managing like different people from different countries would be quite difficult. One of the things I'd really like to do is in regards to like career is I'd like to be able to like, wow, I said like so many times in the last 5 seconds. I want to be able to like have events that take place.
Okay.
I would love to be able to invite like people for different challenges and animation challenges. But the hard thing I find of that is finding time to be able to set that up and coordinate it. Like one challenge I've had in mind for ages is a like PvP tournament where it's all animated. And we have some commentators set up and they'll say, hi guys, today we have our fight with Shifty here and he's going to be putting together something interesting for us. And then the fight takes place and maybe the arena gets destroyed, your animation plays, and then we have our next fight. And our next fight, I always thought that would be so cool for an animation challenge where it's like a series of fights that take place and we cut to every single person and we exist as commentators.
Yeah. When you're thinking of stuff like that, do you have a lot of inspiration from animes when it comes to that? Because I know like with your, I want to say the Rindy videos has a very like 70s samurai movie type aesthetic.
Oh, with Rendies, we sat down and we were like, we kind of messaged each other like simultaneously. And the discussion was, let's stand out from the crowd. And instead of trying to look like RuneScape, let's look like a 90s anime.
Yeah.
that is also RuneScape. And if we go down that avenue, it's going to be interesting. So we went towards that, and then we kind of kept that style going for our animations where it was very anime-esque, very Dragon Ball Z, very different.
Yeah. Is that something that's personal for you, or is that just a style that you guys kind of agreed upon?
It was a style we agreed upon, and I was messing around with that at the time because, you know, my endeavor is still to make Berserk 2016 better. I still, ever since I first started, I'm like, man, if I could make like an anime that's better than Berserk 2016, I'd be really happy and satisfied. And I've pulled elements together, and I've definitely, you know, tried to top aspects, but God, that was terribly animated, that show.
Well, the last question, because I don't want to keep you too long. How do you find making something like old school that, to be honest, looks kind of like garbage most of the time into something that feels like art?
You got to think about what people think RuneScape looks like and not what RuneScape looks like. That's the biggest challenge and the weirdest thing. And it's a very, very fine line. If you go too far, people go, what is this? This isn't RuneScape. And, I've stuffed that up. I've went too far at times. But then at the same time, you don't want to go too close to in-game because people look at it and go, dude, you should have just recorded it in-game. What's the point of doing that?
Yeah.
So you want to kind of make it what people think RuneScape looks like. So when you have a scenario where someone's in Theater of Blood, it's like when they think back to Theater of Blood, what's their brain and imagination like filling out? It's not just flat colors. We're not fishing at a flat beach right now. When you think back to Catherby, you're imagining, sunshine, oceans, and what you think it looks like. But also translating into an aesthetic. So one thing I've focused on with animations is I don't sit down and try to make the characters look like shaded the way they do in game. I go for that flat, low poly look because one, it's what they use for all their concept art. So if you open the Jagex launcher and you look at the classic photo of the guy in Bandos on the cover, that's what RuneScape looks like, according to the, official art. So try and match that. Look like what people fantasize RuneScape looking about.
Yeah, that reminds me of Final Fantasy.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Reminds me of Final Fantasy VII. Like, in my head, that it's, when I played it as a kid, it looks like, what it looks like now, the remakes. But you go and play it on a PlayStation 1, it does not look good.
Oh, yeah. It's exactly what you fantasize it looking about. Same thing, like when you cast a spell, your brain's imagining it glowing and being full of power, but it doesn't glow. And the same approach applies to thumbnails as well. Like, it's what you imagine RuneScape is. You think about RuneScape and you go, okay, I'm on this epic journey. I imagine it looking like this. When you see tiles on the ground, you imagine them glowing. They don't glow.
Yeah. So where can people find your stuff if they want to check out your videos?
The best place to look at me and the most place to see my stuff is on Twitter. I post to Twitter all the time. I post my favorite thumbnails on there, not every single one, and I post my favorite animations on there. I also upload to YouTube, but I've been in a bit of like a weird crux with YouTube where I'm not sure what kind of videos to upload because I want to get the most out of them when I upload them. So there's a good place to check me out. I also haven't streamed in quite a while, but it's definitely a good place to follow as well for when I do go live because I do live tutorials where I'll start with a project and we'll explain every step as we go through.
That's awesome. Well, man, thank you so much for taking the time to
The
talk to me.
Scold is my username everywhere.
Yes, the Scold. And then also your Discord, which is another place.
Oh, yes, you can see all of my stuff on my Discord, and it's a wonderful place, and everyone helps each other.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. It's been so much fun. Thank you for letting me pick your brain. And go check out his stuff. Go join the Discord and hang out.
Thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.